Hello, ELA 3. Mr. B here. So, I've read through your first set of packets for 1984, and I want to first say that I'm very pleased with some of the responses and hard work I've seen from many of you. However, there are also areas of concern that I want to address in this video, specifically regarding how to incorporate textual evidence and in-text citations into your responses. Now, unfortunately, the majority of you seem to have missed a very important detail in the instructions in this packet. So if you take a look at page 1 in your packet right here, where I've tried to highlight in a straight line, you can see that immediately following this asterisk I state, for each response, use textual evidence to support your answers. Now I find it hard to believe that 98% of you skipped past reading these short instructions, so I can only assume that some extra review on what textual evidence is and how it is structured is much needed, especially considering that I will be looking for textual evidence in each response for your second packet. So I've gathered some key observations about your first packets and illustrated them in this pros/cons T-chart, pros being areas that I'm pleased with and cons being areas that need improvement. For the pro section, the majority of you have responded to each prompt, and many of you have provided reflective, in-depth answers that demonstrate critical thinking, meaning that you use your understanding of plot development and character relations in order to make educational claims about the novel. Now in the cons section, obviously the area of most concern is the significant lack in textual evidence and in-text citations. Again, I'm not sure if it's a result of skipping over instructions, but if that is the case, you must make sure to read through all the instructions for an assignment and carefully. Another issue is that I've received many incomplete packets, as well as many one-word or one-sentence responses, especially with number 3, which we will take a look at shortly here. Now, if you're unaware, we are following a pass or fail grading scale this quarter, which means that partial credit is not a factor in grading. So if you're turning in packets that are incomplete or lacking crucial requirements, they will be marked as a 0. So keep that in mind as you complete these future assignments for all your classes. Also, before I get started, I have one packet with no name. So if this is your packet, please reach out to me through email or the Remind app to let me know it is yours. So you may be asking yourselves, why is textual evidence important in the first place? Well, the main function of textual evidence is essentially to persuade your audience to believe that whatever claim or argument you're making is valid and holds truth. So textual evidence is used to support the claim or argument you're making. It shows your audience where you obtained your information from, which then enables us to determine whether or not the source you gathered your information from is credible. Credible meaning accurate and trustworthy. And textual evidence shows your audience how and why you arrived at your conclusion. And in my opinion, this is probably the most important English skill to learn and develop now. Because not only will you be required to include textual evidence in nearly every paper you write in college, for those of you who wish to pursue college, but even if you don't plan on attending college, it's one of the most important social skills to have as an adult when trying to make any kind of claim or argument in the real world. If you can't back up your arguments with evidence, no one's ever going to believe you or consider you a credible source. For example, we've seen it with Trump for years now, where he'll throw out these false claims at press conferences without being able to back these claims up with evidence or statistics. And clearly this has dampened the tendency of millions of Americans to believe most of the claims he makes now. So if you want to feel like a trustworthy and reliable person with your friends, peers, and community, then this is a skill that you need to start practicing now, especially if you're a senior in high school. So having said that, when you're responding to each prompt in your packet, your goal should be to number 1, answer the question clearly. Number 2, explain to your audience, in other words me, why or how you came to this conclusion. And step number 3, back up your claim with proof from the text. So, what does an in-text citation look like? Well, there are three parts to an in-text citation. Part number one is the direct quote from the text, meaning you're rewriting the line word for word as it's shown in the text and placing quotation marks around it, or a paraphrased version, meaning you're rephrasing the information you've gathered in your own words. Whichever the case may be, whenever you're repeating information you've gained from another source, that information must be cited, otherwise it's considered plagiarism. Now, part number 2 and 3 immediately follow part number 1 in parentheses. Part number 2 is the author's last name, and part number 3 is the page number of the information you've gathered, since we are reading a novel. However, if the source you're using is a website or an article, page number might not be available. So things like paragraph number or the year of the source's publication would also be acceptable in these instances. And when you combine these three parts, you arrive at the format of an in-text citation, which you can see at the bottom of your screen. Now, a few things to note about this format. Number one, when making an in-text citation, you never leave a period at the end of your quote, even if that line in the original text ends right there with a period. The reason being is that you need a period at the end of your parentheses to end the sentence. And if you have a period before the parentheses as well, that forces the parentheses to act as an independent clause, which it definitely is not. An independent clause, in its simplest form, must have a subject and a verb. Now, the way that I think of it is that you're simply just moving the period from the end of your quote to the end of the sentence. Now, number two, notice how there is no comma in between the author's name and the page number in the parentheses. There's only a space. So let's take a look at an example of how you would use textual evidence to support a claim. Now, the claim I'm making here is my first sentence. The party shops oftentimes experience shortages of necessary items. Now, I'm going to use textual evidence to support that claim. So I say, for example, Simon asks Winston if he has any razor blades because, quote, there had been a famine of them for months. Okay, so there are quotation marks around the blue line because it is a line that I've rewritten word for word as it's shown in the text. Now in the text there's a period right after the word months because the sentence ends there in the text. So as you can see, I've omitted that period, or I've gotten rid of that period, and moved it to the end of the parentheses to indicate my citation. Orwell is the last name of the author, George Orwell, and 48 is the page number that I retrieved this quote from. Also notice how I say for example before giving my example. Now the reason I point this out is because a college professor a couple years ago told me that if you're not saying for example after making a claim now and then, you might not be including textual evidence. So getting in a habit of at least mentally thinking that way after making a claim might help you remember to support your claim with evidence. So now we're going to look at an example from packet 1, specifically number 3. I chose number 3 because number 3 was one that overwhelmingly was answered with a very short response. So number 3 asks, does Winston genuinely care about either Simon or Parsons? And the popular answer was essentially, no, he doesn't care, or yes, he does care, with no further elaboration after that. So if you are on the side to argue that Winston does not care about Simon nor Parsons, then this is one way you could phrase that response. So number 1, I'm answering the question clearly by saying Winston does not care about Simon nor Parsons in the same manner that he used to. Okay, and now I'm going to elaborate and support my argument by using textual evidence. So I say Winston considers Simon a friend But the narrator then explains that friends nowadays are more so considered comrades. Okay? So notice how this information does not have quotation marks around it because I'm not copying the line word for word. However, I still need to cite it because this is paraphrased information. Paraphrased meaning that I'm gathering the information from this text but rephrasing it in my own words. Okay? Orwell is there because it is the last name of George Orwell, the author. And 48 is there because it is the page number that I retrieved this information from. Boom shakalaka. Alright, we are all finished. Hopefully that helped clear things up for you. If not, if you still have more questions or any lingering confusion, please feel free to reach out to me either via email at dbielecki@zenithacademy.org, or you can reach out to me through the Remind app using the passcode at DBIELEC.